"Dad, why am I not in your book?" That was the first thing I said. Standing in his living room, holding the memoir he'd just mailed out to our entire family, neighbors, old coworkers, even the mailman. He blinked. Didn't look up right away. "What do you mean?" Page 47, Ava's camping trip. Page 83, Mom's garden. Page 112, the dog, the neighbor, even the plumber who fixed the basement flood. But me? Not a line. Not a picture. Not even a name. He set his mug down slowly, like he was trying to weigh his answer. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said. "You've always been kind of distant. It didn't feel like you were part of the story." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that sentence felt like the final paragraph of a chapter I'd spent my whole life writing. The one where I gave everything to this family, and still got edited out. "Dad, why am I not in your book?" It had been 3 days since the envelope arrived. 3 days since I opened Roots and Ridges in my quiet kitchen in Portland and realized I didn't exist in my father's version of our family. Not even a footnote. He didn't answer right away. He just blinked, twice, then looked away like I'd asked what time dinner was. "What do you mean?" he said, his tone almost weary. I held up the hardcover in my hand, the one he'd proudly signed for everyone at the book launch that weekend. Everyone except me. Page 47, Ava's camping trip. Page 83, Mom's first garden. Page 112, the neighbor who taught you to fix the washing machine. Page 149, even the dog. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. But me? Not a line, not a picture, not a sentence. He set his mug down on the oak table he built himself back in 1988. The same table I refinished 2 summers ago when the lacquer cracked and Mom worried it would stain. "I didn't mean anything by it," he finally said. "You've always been kind of distant. It didn't feel like you were part of the story." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that sentence felt like the final paragraph of a chapter I had spent my entire life writing. 3 hours later, I stood in the foyer of the house I grew up in. The same house where I'd once patched a pipe burst in the middle of December. The same hallway where I'd held Mom's hand after she fainted during chemo. The same guest room I painted 3 different colors before Ava's prom because she couldn't decide. They were having a small celebration that night. Dad's book had passed 5,000 pre-orders. A local newspaper had done a feature. He was beaming. So were they. Ava saw me first. She rushed over, wrapped her arms around me like we'd always been close. We hadn't. "Hannah, I didn't know you were coming. Isn't the book amazing?" I didn't answer. She didn't notice. She was already turning back to show her fiancé the display table. Stacks of Roots and Ridges. A digital frame rotating family photos. None of me. Not one. In the living room, laughter poured out like a soundtrack from a happier life. Dad stood by the fireplace, retelling the story about how he once built a treehouse without any blueprints. Everyone laughed like it was the first time they'd heard it. I stood at the doorway and watched. "There's my girl," Mom said, walking over with a glass of wine. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She kissed my cheek, like an apology she didn't have the words for. "Have you read it?" she asked. I didn't answer. Just handed her the copy in my hands. Dog-eared, marked, with 2 sticky notes. She opened it slowly. Saw where I'd highlighted the acknowledgments page. To Ava, my compass. To Denise, the love of my life. And to everyone who helped shape this journey. "Everyone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me. And for a second, just a second, her smile faltered. He didn't mean to hurt you." "He didn't have to," I said. "He just had to forget me." And he did. I moved past her, into the room full of guests. The kind of guests who knew us as the Barnes family. The solid, rooted, well-loved kind of family you write memoirs about. No one looked surprised to see me. No one asked where I'd been. They assumed I'd always been here. Just not important enough to mention. Dad turned when I approached. His face tightened, not out of guilt, but out of that same discomfort he wore any time someone brought up complicated things. Hannah, tell me something, I cut in. Who scanned those photographs? He hesitated. You did, years ago. Who helped you find a publisher when you didn't know what query letter meant? Yeah? And who held your hand in the ICU when you thought you were having a heart attack? His voice dropped. You did. Then why am I not in this book? The room fell silent, not out of tension, but because no one expected a scene. Not from me. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the easy daughter. Ava stepped forward. Hannah, this isn't the time. No, I said, holding up a hand. It's exactly the time. Because this book is being passed around like a love letter to a family that only half existed. It's being praised for its honesty. But honesty that erases someone isn't truth. It's revision. I turned to Dad. I'm not upset about being left out of your memories. I'm upset that you made sure I wouldn't exist in anyone else's either. No one spoke. I didn't wait for them to. I walked out, past the photo table, the buffet spread, the bookshelf I once helped build. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I just left. The night I walked out of my father's book launch, it rained. Not a heavy downpour, not cinematic. Just a slow, steady drizzle. The kind that soaked through everything without asking permission. I drove in silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the rhythm of the windshield wipers slicing through a world that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. Back in my apartment, I left the book on the counter. Didn't open it. Didn't touch it. Just stared at the name embossed in gold on the front cover. Roots and Ridges, A Life Remembered. By Richard Barnes. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who once taught me that family is the only thing that lasts had managed to write 312 pages without including his eldest daughter. The next morning, I didn't wake up to regret. I didn't replay the confrontation in my head. Didn't wonder if I'd raised my voice, embarrassed him, ruined Ava's party dress moment. All I felt was space, like something had cracked open, and the air rushing in wasn't shame. It was clarity. I opened my email out of habit. Among the usual spam, there was one with a subject line that made me pause. Roots and Ridges, Potential International Edition. I clicked. Dear Ms. Barnes, my name is Lucia Navarro. I'm an editor for a publishing house in Spain, currently negotiating foreign rights for your father's memoir. I scanned the message, then slowed at this part. Several of our reviewers felt the emotional arc of the book was uneven. While the author speaks often of his younger daughter, the structure gives the impression that another perspective is missing. That word. Missing. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. Later that week, I was back in the small bookstore down the street, the one with creaky wooden floors and a cat named Basil who slept on the philosophy shelf. Dad's book was on display. 3 copies left. One with a sticky note. Poignant, gentle, a love letter to memory. I picked one up. Not to buy it, just to check something. I flipped to page 227. The story about Mom's second cancer diagnosis. He'd written, Ava took time off work. She was there every afternoon. Denise leaned on her like a second spine. No mention of the fact that I was the one who took night shifts for 3 weeks to cover for Mom's lost income. No mention of the rides to the oncology center. Of the bills I paid when insurance delayed processing. Just Ava. Always Ava. I remembered that winter. I was 29, working full-time. Still driving to their house every night after work to help with meals, medication, and bed changes. One night, Mom had whispered to me in the hallway, "Thank you, you're saving us." But I guess gratitude, like memory, doesn't always make the final draft. I stayed in that bookstore for a long time. Watched a middle-aged woman pick up the book, flip through the pages, smile. This is the kind of father everyone wishes they had, she told her friend. And something inside me sank. Not because I wanted to ruin that image, but because I had lived inside that image, invisible. 3 days later, I received an email from a stranger. Subject: Your voice matters more than you think. It came from a reader in Canada. I didn't recognize the name. Dear Hannah, I read your father's book last week. I don't know you, and I hope this message isn't intrusive, but your absence was loud. There's a weight to what's not said, a daughter-shaped outline in every chapter. I kept wondering where you were. If this email ever finds you, I just wanted to say, I see you. I read it 3 times. Then once more just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. It felt like someone had knocked on the door of a house I had long assumed was boarded shut. That night, I reopened Lucia Navarro's email. Her offer still stood. A foreword, an afterword, a preface, call it whatever we wanted, but something from me. To complete the emotional arc, she'd said. I typed, I'm open to writing something. But only if I can tell the truth, not as the daughter he wrote about, but as the one he wrote around. 3 days later, Lucia and I met again over video call. She looked exhausted, but kind. The kind of person who'd spent more time listening than most people spend talking. Write something that fills the silence, she said. It doesn't have to be long, just on. I nodded. You mean like a letter? She tilted her head slightly. I mean the chapter he didn't write. I didn't know where to begin. There's no map for the parts of your life that got edited out. I opened a blank document and stared at the blinking cursor. Then typed, You don't always notice when your presence starts shrinking in someone's story until the final version has no room for you at all. I let it sit there, not because it was perfect, but because it was the first true thing I'd said in weeks. The next day, Lucia sent me a brief message. Can I ask something personal? You don't have to answer. Sure, I replied. Then she asked, What's the last moment you remember truly feeling like you belonged in your family? I froze, not because it was too intimate, but because I didn't have an answer. I didn't answer Lucia's question right away. I just closed the laptop and sat there, in the quiet. What was the last moment I truly felt like I belonged? I sifted through years, birthdays, holidays, vacations. Then I landed on one. I was 14. It was spring break. We had gone camping, Dad, Mom, Ava, and me. The campground wasn't anything special. A small clearing near a lake, some old picnic tables, the smell of damp pine and wood smoke. But I remembered one evening. I'd made the fire that night. Built it from scratch, twigs, kindling, logs. Ava had tried but given up. Dad had said, Let your sister take over, she's better at this kind of thing. And when the fire caught, flared orange and strong, he'd clap me on the back. That's my girl, he said. Solid, reliable. I'd felt proud. Seen. Useful in the way that meant worthy. I opened the memoir to check. The camping trip was in there. Page 145. I read the passage. It described Ava lighting the fire. How she fumbled at first, then got it right. How Dad watched her, beaming with pride. She looked like her mother then, determined, graceful under pressure. I blinked. Read it again. He had rewritten it. Made Ava the center. The one who made the fire. The one he praised. I wasn't even there in the memory anymore. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Just quiet, like a branch bending under too much snow. He hadn't just forgotten me. He had rewritten me out, piece by piece. He took moments that were mine, earned, lived, and gave them away like borrowed things. That night, I didn't sleep, but I wrote. For hours. Not just to Lucia. Not for the Spanish edition, but for myself. I wrote the fire, the wet wood, the blister on my thumb, Dad's words, that's my girl, and how I had clung to them for years like a life raft. I ended with this. When you erase someone from your story, they don't disappear. They just move outside the frame until they start writing their own. I sent the piece on a Tuesday morning. attached as a Word doc. Subject line, simple. Board submission, the unwritten chapter. I almost didn't press send. Not because I doubted the words, but because once you let your version of the truth out into the world, you can't take it back. Lucia responded 3 hours later. I'd just finished reading. I had to step away from my desk. Thank you for this. No edits, no notes. She attached a draft cover for the Spanish edition. My name was printed just below my father's, with a special foreword by Hannah Barnes. It was the first time I'd ever seen my name on the same line as his. 1 week passed. Then 2. Then something unexpected happened. A tweet, posted by a literary critic in Sao Paulo. Just finished the Spanish edition of Roots and Ridges. The foreword broke me. Why wasn't she in the original? How many daughters are written out of stories because they were too steady, too silent, too useful to be worth remembering? The tweet went viral. I didn't know until Ava texted me. People are tagging you on Twitter. What did you do? I opened the app, one I rarely used, and searched my name. The thread had exploded. People were screenshotting passages from my foreword, sharing stories of their own. Mothers, sons, sisters. I was the one who held the family together, but was always left out of the photo album. My father told everyone he only had one child. I was the other. Reading this felt like someone opened a door I didn't know I was locked behind. Then came the articles. When memoirs forget their daughters. The silent side of family stories. They weren't about me, not exactly. But they were about people like me. People who were always almost seen. Lucia messaged again. Would you be willing to do a short interview? The press is asking. I hesitated. I hadn't gone into this looking for a microphone. But maybe it was time someone heard my voice from outside the margins. The radio interview aired on a Thursday evening. A local segment, quiet, 15 minutes long. I sat in my apartment, listening with my tea growing cold in my hands. They'd pre-recorded it 2 days before. The host had asked simple questions. What was it like reading a book that forgot you? Why do you think so many families leave someone out? What do you want readers to take away? I'd answered, calm and clear. But this was the one line that started showing up everywhere. Sometimes, being the reliable one just means being the one they expect to survive the silence. Within an hour, people were posting quotes again. Messaging me. Emailing me stories. Dozens. Then hundreds. But what I didn't know was that back in Salem, in the town I had quietly left years ago, people were listening too. At the diner, my father's old friend Jim was refilling his coffee when he heard the voice. Isn't that Richard's girl? He asked his wife. She turned up the volume. By the time Dad walked in that Saturday morning for his usual booth, the waitress didn't greet him with the same warmth. She just slid the menu forward and said, Heard the shell. Nothing more. My mother stayed off social media. But Ava didn't. She texted again. What is all this, Hannah? Why didn't you just talk to Dad privately? You've embarrassed him. I didn't reply. Because the thing about truth is, when you've spent years hiding it, its reappearance feels like exposure. But truth doesn't embarrass you. Only the lie that needed hiding does. The first message came from my father. Hannah, I've read what you wrote. I didn't realize how deeply I'd hurt you. I wish we had talked sooner. No defense. No anger. Just a softness that felt unfamiliar coming from him. But I didn't answer. Not yet. The second message came from Av. Longer. More emotion. Still centered on her. I didn't know you felt like that. I guess maybe I never really saw how things looked from your side. But this whole thing, it's gone too far. You've made Dad look like a villain. That was the difference between us. She saw reality as damage to reputation. I saw truth as freedom. A week passed. Then another. I didn't post. Didn't tweet. Didn't do anything public. I just lived. Walked in the park. Watered my plants. taught my weekend writing workshop like always. And then the third message came. But not from them. It came from a professor. Department of Literature. Small liberal arts university in Washington State. We're organizing a lecture series titled Erased Histories When Families Rewrite Memory. Your story and your voice moved us deeply. Would you be willing to come speak? I sat still for a long time after reading it. Not because I was nervous, but because no one had ever asked me to speak on purpose. Only out of necessity. Only when something broke. Only when someone needed fixing. This was different. This was invitation, not expectation. I said yes. The lecture hall was smaller than I expected. Old wood, quiet lighting, 40, maybe 50 chairs. No stage, just a raised platform and a single microphone. It wasn't grand, but it was right. Because this time, I wasn't here for ceremony. I wasn't holding anyone else's words. I was holding my own. The coordinator, Professor Ellen Wright, welcomed me gently. Warm eyes. A clipboard pressed to her chest like a promise not to overstep. Take your time, she said, before leaving me at the back door of the room. The audience hadn't arrived yet. Just me and the sound of my breath. And something else? A strange silence that didn't feel threatening. It felt patient. Like this room had waited years for me to speak. When I stepped to the mic, I didn't open my notes. I just stood still. Let the quiet settle. Then, I said, my father published his memoir 3 years ago. It was 312 pages long. I wasn't mentioned once. A few heads tilted forward. One woman clutched a pen. Someone else looked down, like trying to hide a sting. He wrote about my sister, my mother, our neighbors. He included the name of the boy who mowed our lawn one summer. But not me. Pause. And the truth is, I didn't cry. Not at first. Because when someone edits you out of their life, the hardest part isn't the absence. It's realizing how well they practiced forgetting. I looked out at the crowd. Some were nodding, others still. So I continued. For a long time, I thought silence was strength. I was the one who stayed calm, paid the bills, drove mom to chemo, cleaned up after arguments no one admitted happened. But when the book came out, I realized silence is also what makes you erasable. I opened the folder. Inside was the printed copy of the foreword I'd written, the one now being quoted, translated, debated, the chapter that never made it into the first version of the book. I held it up gently. This is what I wrote when they asked me what had been left out. Then, I began. Some stories are written in ink, others in omission. My father's book is filled with scenes of laughter, hardship, memory. He remembers the brand of his first car, the name of his third-grade teacher, the street they lived on when the dog ran away. But he doesn't remember me. A hush wrapped the room. Not stiff, just still. I don't mean he forgot I existed. I mean he forgot how I mattered. When my mother was sick, I held her hair as she threw up. When my sister needed tuition, I covered the last semester. When my father broke his ankle, I drove him to every appointment. He remembers the driveway, but not who salted it that winter. A woman in the front row quietly reached for a tissue. I kept reading. This is not a cry for credit. This is a reckoning with silence. Because being the strong one doesn't mean you're indestructible. It just means people forget you need to be seen, too. I looked up. I wrote this not to change the past, but to say, I was there. When I finished reading, I didn't say thank you. I just closed the folder, held it in my arms, and stood there, not triumphant, not glowing, just present. No one clapped right away, and I was grateful for that, because applause would have ruined the moment, wrapped it up too neatly, made it feel like entertainment. But this wasn't a performance. This was a return. Then one person stood, then another. Not to cheer, just to be with me in that moment. To say without saying, we saw you. After the talk, people came up slowly. Some asked for a copy of the speech. Some shared their own stories. An aunt left out of a family tree, a mother forgotten in the will. But then, there was the girl, maybe 16. Black hoodie, faded backpack, hair tucked behind both ears, like she didn't want to be seen but desperately needed someone to look. She waited until everyone else had stepped away. Then she handed me something. A page, torn from a book. She didn't speak, just pointed to the paragraph. Her father's name, her brother's name, her mother's. Then a space. A literal space. No mention of her. I looked at her. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. Jess whispered, "Thank you for saying it." Then she walked away. I held that torn page for a long time. Later that night, I slipped it into my own copy of Roots and Ridges. Right between page 144 and 145. Right where the camping story used to live. Right where I used to be. I didn't tell anyone I was going to the library the next morning. Just walked in, quiet, wearing the same coat I'd worn the day I found my name missing from 312 pages. This time, I walked straight to the local authors section. Found the familiar spine. Cream jacket, gold letters, Roots and Ridges. I slid it from the shelf. Held it. Still heavy. Still beautiful. Still incomplete. I flipped to the dedication page. Still the same. To Ava, my compass. To Denise, the love of my life. To everyone who helped shape this journey. I smiled. Then pulled from my bag a pen. Tucked between pages 144 and 145. I wrote in the margin. And to the daughter who lit the fire that night and stayed awake to keep it burning. Then I closed the book, slid it back onto the shelf, and walked away. Not unseen, not erased, but written in, finally, by my own hand.